work for a company fastname.no, but please don't go to that website because it's awful and it doesn't represent me. I'm going to talk about science of design today. Even though I have been going to the art school, I have never been working as a designer ever in my life. Even though I have a master's degree in computer engineering, I have never worked as an engineer or scientist ever. So it makes perfect sense that I'm the one to present this talk to you. I like this quote by American designer Paula Scher, who is the designer of the new Windows 8 logo. She says the best way to accomplish... Yes, Windows 8 has the new logo, yes, exactly. The best way to accomplish serious design is to be totally and completely unqualified for the job. What does she mean by this? Is that when you are unqualified and you are asked to do this job, you will start playing with this task. You will start figuring out how this works, what you need to do in order to accomplish this in the most effective way. And that's why I like to talk about things, to provide topics of the talks that I'm not qualified to talk about, because then I have an opportunity to study this topic, to learn it, and to see really fascinating things happening when you, for example, in comparison to when you are a designer and you're designing just based on your experience. Then you don't notice all the fancy and beautiful and amazing things happening right in front of you. So since my early years, I remember myself always assembling and disassembling different stuff like toys and all these things, just because I wanted to know how they work, how they are intended to work. And when I became a front-end developer, I'm a front-end developer. I'm doing just front-end development. And when I became one, and I was studying CSS, I wasn't studying CSS from tutorials or how-tos or like video lessons or something like that. The first thing I was reading was CSS specification, just because I want to know how things are intended to work. In order to do something good, you need to know the capabilities, the properties of the material you're working with. But then again, I'm a front-end developer, and why am I going to talk about design in the tech track? That sounds like not really good idea, but may I ask you, how many of you consider themselves pure front-end developers? They don't do design, just front-end. Okay, how many of you consider yourself designers? Wonderful. And the rest are back-end developers or what? Okay, guys. Seems like you're just too shy, or after party it's still getting back. But okay. Let me tell you a story. At my previous work, I was working in a consultancy company, and we were doing just development. We didn't have any designers. We didn't do design. So whenever we needed to participate in a tender for a large project, we had to cooperate with some design agency, or if they were willing to participate in a tender, they had to subcontract us as developers. And usually the process was quite bizarre, because the designers were signing off the design with the client. Then client was giving back this design to us, and we were coding it and implementing it in the system. And then if some changes had to be done, we had to contact the design agency again. They had to come to sign it off again and then get back to us. It was quite weird process. Because in the times of responsive web design, when it is just impossible to predict all the screen sizes you're working with, it's impossible to create static designs for pretty much every screen you're going to look your site on. At the beginning of August, .NET Magazine published this post by James Young titled Top 10 Responsive Web Design Problems and How to Avoid Them. And problem number two in this list was the lack of a static design phase. And the solution that James suggests to this problem is that you just design in the browser. This is quite popular, quite trendy topic these days. But I'm quite far from being a proponent of this approach, because when front-end developer starts doing design in the browser, or when designer starts doing front-end development, usually you don't get anything. You don't get design, you don't get front end. It's just everybody has to do what they do the best. Designers should do design, front-end developers should do front-end development. But for front-end developers, it's essential to know how design works. Because as I said, front-end developers are craftsmen. We are like craftsmen. We take material, being in design in our case, and we turn it into a product. We turn it into something tangible. We are like front-end development is like the product design. It just happens that in comparison to the standard product design, our product is just website. It's not something you can carry and bring somewhere. It's just a website. So I would like to talk to you as front-end developer to the developers about some things that identify design, so that we as front-end developers would be able to make design-related decisions in our work when we work with responsive design, when we have to make design-related decisions, because it's impossible to ask designers all the time to give me one more static design, give me one more design, one more. It's impossible. So first of all, let's figure out what is design. Design is a communication. Design is not a picture. Design is a functional layer that sits on top of the information of your website and makes it easy to consume for the end user. It's just the functional layer. It's not an art. I like this quote by designer Paul Bogue. We are designers, not artists. The main difference being that we produce things that solve problems. This is very, very important. We produce things that solve problems. We don't produce pictures. And this is the main difference between us as the proper developers who understand what is design and those who think that design is an art. Design is very far from being an art. So today I'm going to tell you about some basic design principles that you can find in pretty much any design, any good design, and moreover you can find it in any kind of art as well, in painting, in music, and these principles have been here for years, centuries, and thousands of years, and human brain is just accustomed to accept these principles, and it is accustomed to accept them as a measure of good and beautiful things. And we will start. The problem with design principles is that there are as many design principles as there are authors writing about design principles, and everybody defines their objective design principles. But the principles I'm going to talk to you about today are really, really simple and really targeted to the very basics of pretty much anything we do. So, of course, the first principle of design I would call the cornerstone is proportion. Proportion is the key in making things beautiful, in making them look good. Since really, really early days of humanity, people were basing almost everything they do on proportions. In ancient Greece, for example, everything has been built based on proportions because there were no known ways of measuring things. So people were basing everything on proportions. There were some discussions on what proportion is best, whether it's 1/5, that is the size of the nose in relation to the head, or 1/7, that is the size of the head in relation to the body, or 1/8 in the ideal form of body. But proportion has been with humanity for years, centuries, and thousands of years. But proportion, the main point of proportion is, of course, geometry. And Robert Brinkhurst, in his book, The Elements of Typographical Style, writes this thing. Let me just read it because the font is probably not very readable. The page is a piece of paper. It is also a visible and tangible proportion, silently sounding the thorough bass of the book. On it lies the text block, which must answer to the page. The two together, page and text block, produce an antiphonal geometry. That geometry alone can bond the reader to the book, or conversely, it can put the reader to sleep, or put the reader's nerves on edge, or drive the reader away. This sums up really nicely the power of geometry, the power of proportion. It can influence people. Subconsciously, people react to proportion. Whether they want this or not, they do react. It is year 520 before Christ. It is dark night. Offshore of Greece, there is a small boat with some people in it. There is something happening in that boat. Hippasus of Metapontum stood on the deck preparing to die. Around him stood the members of a cult, a secret brotherhood that he had betrayed. Hippasus had revealed a secret that was deadly to the Greek way of thinking, a secret that threatened to undermine the entire philosophy that the brotherhood had struggled to build. For revealing the secret, the great Pythagoras himself sentenced Hippasus to death by drowning. To protect their number philosophy, the cult would kill. Charles Seifer, Zero, the biography of a dangerous idea. Let's figure out, what did this poor man, Hippasus, made wrong? What secret did he reveal that the Pythagoras himself sentenced him to death? Let's dive into history for a while. Hippasus was a member of Pythagorean school of mathematicians in 6th century before Christ. And as we all know, Pythagoreans are responsible for Pythagorean theorem, surprisingly. And Pythagorean theorem, in essence, says that the square of hypotenuse in any right triangle equals sum of squares of catheti. Pretty simple thing. And while proving this theorem, Pythagoreans found this weird thing. Right triangle, as they were supposing, with length of catheti as 1 unit. And when trying to prove their Pythagorean theorem, they figured out that this length is some unknown number. Why it is unknown? It looks quite okay these days, but in 6th century before Christ, there was no square root. This sign itself has been brought to Europe in 16th century only. Before this invention, everything has been based on integers. There was nothing that could not be expressed with integers. And Pythagoreans were really shocked when they found a number that cannot be expressed as a ratio of integers. The motto of the school of Pythagoreans was all is number. Imagine how huge impact this discovery could have on the most powerful school of mathematics that found something that is not number, that contradicts with their motto. The whole society has been built on sacred meaning of numbers. And finding this was really, really dangerous thing. And of course, people were wondering, what is this? Why? And they wanted to keep this a secret before they figure out what is going on with this number. And even decimal fraction has been brought to Europe in 16th century only. So there was no way to express this. It was nothing people could understood. And this is our first proportion, square root of 2. On this picture, you see Pythagoras himself probably writing something like Keldes Hippasus, or something like this. But this is the fragment of the fresco by Raphael, where he describes a lot of scientists of ancient Greece. So in our world, we express square root of 2 proportion as 1 to 1.41, approximately, because this is known to be the first irrational number known to humankind. Irrational not because it doesn't have any logic, but because it cannot be expressed by a ratio of integers. This is why it is called irrational. Why it is the first irrational number? Because this is the Babylonian clay tablet from 19th century before Christ. And you can see this square with diagonals. And these marks are approximation of the same number, square root of 2. So this is believed to be the first occurrence of the square root of 2 proportion. But it's all history, it's all interesting to dive into, but what is the practical meaning of this proportion? Where do we use this? Where do we see these? This is the pile of paper on my desk. Surprisingly enough, we face square root of 2 proportion every day in our life. This is the proportion of any European standard paper size, A4, A3, A5, A6, whatever. Why is it good to have paper standardized this way? Because square root of 2 proportion has a really interesting property. If you have a rectangle proportioned with square root of 2 ratio and fold it along the short side, you'll get 2 rectangles with the same proportion. So that's how we make A4 out of A3, A5 out of A4, and so on and so on. So from industrial point of view, this is one of the best proportions. The next proportion, of course, when I was talking to somebody and was telling the topic of my talk, and I was telling that I'm going to talk, like about math, about all this fancy stuff in design, and 100% of people who were trying to guess what is this talk about were telling, golden section, divine proportion. Yes, because by far this is the most well-known proportion. If you type in proportion Google, you will get like 30, 40 first results describing golden section, golden proportion. And original meaning of the golden section is that on any line, you have a dot that splits this line into 2 sections that relate to each other as the long section to the short section relates as the same way as the whole line relates to the long section. It's quite obvious these days. This has been discovered again by Pythagoreans. It was one of the most powerful mathematician school in the world, in all time. It has been discovered in 6th century. Euclid described this modern definition of golden section in 3rd century before Christ. And but golden section is more known for its golden rectangle. So how do you get the golden rectangle? What is this golden rectangle? It's just you take the square, you find the middle dot on the side, you get the line to the corner of the square, you drop the line to the axis of the dot, and here you go. You have the golden rectangle. Quite easy, quite trivial. Another popular incarnation of golden section is golden spiral. It is built the same way with using golden rectangles and just connecting the opposite corners. In the 13th century, Leonardo Fibonacci discovered the interesting sequence of numbers that later has been called the Fibonacci sequence. And those numbers are built with golden proportion in them. The thing is that when Leonardo Fibonacci has been discovering these numbers, he didn't think about golden section at all. What he wanted to achieve is to just calculate the population of rabbits of ideal family during 1 year. And he just, by using this bizarre idea, he got to the point of this sequence being representation of golden section. So nowadays, we usually use Fibonacci sequence and golden section interchangeably, but technically they're completely different things. It's just they happen to produce the same results. Where can we find the golden section? Everywhere, and the most fascinating example of golden section is our cells. Human body is full of golden section occurrences. So like forearm relates to the palm exactly with the golden section ratio, with the golden ratio. The forearm to the whole arm is related with the same ratio. It's amazing. The ear is actually the golden spiral. It's really fascinating how we all are built on this proportion. That's why it's called divine proportion, because people believe that this is, in the old days, people believed that since human being is built with this proportion, it should be something from God. So on this painting, this is probably one of the most popular, well-known occurrences of golden section in human body. They work by Leonardo da Vinci based on the works of Italian architect Vitruvius, who sincerely believed that all the architectural forms have to be built on proportions of a human body, because since human beings are flexible, they move, they don't break apart, probably this is a good proportion to build buildings on. Yes, rule of thirds. What is rule of thirds? Rule of thirds is just the proportion of 2 to 3. It is one, just next proportion we're going to talk about today, but it might sound weird. Why did I choose the Star Wars theme to sort of for this particular slide? It's quite easy. Proportion 2/3 is appearing in music, and it's called perfect fifth in music. And the Star Wars theme has exactly music interval of perfect fifth. So this is kind of a musical representation of this proportion. There are occurrences of perfect fifth musical interval is in a lot of things. For example, in this song, The Way You Look Tonight. Brilliant. I like this song. It's fascinating how well this proportion fits our brain. How amazing it sounds really easy. It's very entertaining. At the same time, what is really good about this proportion is that it is really, really close to the golden section. It is really close. If you take these proportions and, for example, set them side by side, the golden rectangle and rectangle proportioned with 2/3 ratio, you will see the difference. But if you take them separately, you will not notice this difference. And it's really good. The good thing about this is that it's a rational number. You can express it with 2 integers, 2 to 3. Really easy. Everybody can relate to integers. And as I said, this number appears in music, in art, in literature. Well, I will show you more examples later. But in general, rule of thirds is really easy. You just take the rectangle, split it in in thirds, and here you go. You can split it vertically, you can split it horizontally. Works just fine, and we will see more examples later. There are much more proportions in this world, of course. 2 of popular as well proportions, 3/4. This is proportion in music. It is called as perfect fourth. This is the most popular music interval of popular music. So whatever popular music you hear, you can be 80% sure that it's based on proportion 3/4. Square root of 3. This is good proportion. It's, again, rational number. And where can you find it? It has the closest relationship to design, actually. Because if you take the color theory, you take this the color circle, and find the ideal colors. For example, triad color system. You take the primary colors. You take three colors standing 120 degrees from each other. The distance between these dots on the circle will be exactly square root of 3 times radius of this circle. So this proportion is in color theory. This is how you build the color theory. It's really amazing. I have this example for you. This is, probably I need to scale it down. This is the page I just assembled using 2 constants. That is, the font size is 16 pixels, and the width of this square is something I don't remember exactly. But the point is that everything within these squares is proportioned according to the declared ratio. So this one is proportioned according to the golden section. So the width of this picture is the golden section, relates to the width of the whole rectangle with the golden ratio. The height of this block relates to the width with golden ratio. This font size relates to the base size with golden ratio. This to this with golden ratio. So the same thing down here, 2/3 proportion, square root of 2, and I've put 3 to 4 proportion as well here. So to see that it's different. It's a little bit different. And as I said, like if you put not square root of 2, but 2/3 and the golden section side by side, you see the notice. But if you would take them apart and measure, 2/3 would look really close to the golden section. So we see these proportions. They're everywhere. But why? Why do they work? Why do people react to them so good? So interesting. So of course, because of all the occurrences in nature, in the human body, as we saw. So once again, the forearm and the palm relation relation is the golden ratio. Daisies, fantastic, but almost all the daisies have either 21, 35, 55, or 89 petals. And these are numbers from Fibonacci sequence. They're not random. They're just from Fibonacci sequence. If you see the individual florets, they're growing with the golden spiral. And of course, the most popular occurrence of golden section in the architecture is Parthenon in Athens. The front of the Parthenon is absolutely amazing, amazingly shaped based on golden section. There are discussions within scientists and architectures whether it was intentional or not, because the perimeter of the Parthenon doesn't match golden section at all. So this is the only one occurrence of the golden section there. So maybe it was intentional, maybe it was not. So, but as I said, in ancient Greece, everything has been built on proportions. I personally don't really believe that it was just spontaneous wish to do these proportions. Of course, this is driven by our brain. Have you been to Bill's talk yesterday, where he was telling about different things happening in our brain? How many of you been there? Those who didn't, you really have to watch the video. It's amazing. Our brain makes so fascinating things in perception. And our brain, the professor of mechanical engineering at Duke University in North Carolina, Adrian Bian, he wrote an article in Scientific magazine. I don't have that article now, unfortunately, but he mathematically proved why the rectangle proportioned with golden ratio is much easier for people to accept and much more pleasing, because it's just the analyzing this information in proportioned in golden rectangle is much easier. Our brain accustomed to that, and he has some fancy calculations with speed of parsing the information, all these things. It's really mind-blowing, but there is a mathematical explanation of why it is beautiful, why we think that it is beautiful. If we take a look at our context we all work in, the computer screen, the device screen, every device screen has the ratio as well. So I've gathered the most popular ones here. This covers pretty much 90% of all the screens we have on the market. And you can see iMacs, HDTV, Google Nexus, MacBook Pro, iPhone, they have different ratios. But if you take the average number, it will be somewhere between this and this, approaching 2/3. It's closer to 2/3 than to 5/8. So once again, I use 2/3 in pretty much everything I do, because it's easy to relate. It's just pleasing proportion. From Facebook, I know that people love kittens, so here we go, kitten, and then we go. Next design principle is similarity. Similarity is one of the base grouping principles of Gestalt psychology, as Bill told yesterday. Similarity brings consistency, unity, and variety to the design, to pretty much anything, not only design. Similarity refers to how the object looks like, not what it consists of or what properties it has. It's just about how it looks like, the perception of this object for a humankind, for a human being. Similarity can be defined with a color. On this slide, I'm pretty sure 99% of you immediately noticed the groups by color, and only then they notice that there are two different shapes of these figures on this slide. People just accept color similarity much faster, and the larger difference between colors, the faster people analyze this information and get this grouping algorithm. Similarity in size. There are two groups of elements here, three largest group elements and smaller elements. And similarity in shape. This is the most subtle similarity because it takes more brain resources to analyze this information. If they have the same size, the same color, it's harder to, it depends on the shape, of course, but usually it is harder for the brain to process this information. Where can we see the occurrences of this thing? It's not nature, it's human built. It's the City of Science in Valencia, built by Santiago Calatrava. Really genius architecture. He has actually his headquarters is in Zurich here, and he designed one of the train stations south from the central station. I don't remember the name. You can ask me later after the talk. I will find that name. Here we see all the similarities in one. All these blocks have the same shape, the same color, the same size. And those who saw this building in real life, it's just magnificent. People just stare at it, and they cannot move their eyes away because it's just beautiful. Pablo Picasso, the most well-known representative of synthetic cubism, where things have been expressed with form rather than their properties. So in this painting, three musicians, usually in cubism, it's kind of hard to realize what is going on there. It's just a mess, usually. But in this particular, this what makes Picasso genius. He used psychology in order to deliver his message. And in this case, he used color and he used shapes to separate these supposedly random geometrical figures. But you clearly see the figures, you clearly see three people, and you see how they are contrasting to each other using color, shape, and it's the example of using these similarity principles in art. The Korean Presbyterian Church, architecture Greg Lynn, it is in Queens in USA. Here you see that these modules, they're different. They're technically different, but they look similar. We perceive them as similar. They have almost the same shape. They have different size, but they have almost the same shape. They have the same color, and they're located close to each other. I'm not talking about this proximity principle of Gestalt psychology today, but those who have been to Bill's talk yesterday, they know what it is about. But in this example, Greg Lynn is basing his works on mathematics. Not really mathematics, but on calculus. And these shapes are not really designed by hand. They're calculated using calculus. What Greg Lynn tells about his work himself is, I'm not interested in ideal forms, and I'm not interested in optimizing to some perfect moment. He takes what math gives him, and then he just tries to improvise with this. He tries to make it beautiful even more. Why does similarity work? Again, this is just psychology, right? So we will try to find the answer in Gestalt psychology. What is this psychology at all? It's the theory of brain and mind, and it has been established in Berlin at the beginning of last century, of the 20th century. And the operational principle of this psychology is that brain perceives objects in their entirety first, before analyzing different parts of it. So it analyzes objects in entirety, how objects are perceived to the human being without diving into details. And this is exactly what we try to achieve with the designs. We want to make the first impression to the users as good as possible. This is all based on Gestalt psychology, how users perceive your site the very first moment. You have the 2-3 seconds of giving them positive feedback, positive feeling. one of the co-founders of Gestalt psychology, Max Wertheimer, I'm sorry, I might have weird pronunciation, Wertheimer, I think, yeah. He said that there are two ways of thinking. Productive thinking is where you solve problems based on your immediate impression. So you see something and, wow, it's beautiful, it's great. And there is reproductive thinking, is when you make assumptions and make conclusions based on your experience, on your previous experience. Let me show you one thing. This is the quote by Neil deGrasse Tyson. Can you read it loud, please? Nobody can. Okay, but silently. Did somebody read this quote? Okay, Vitaly, yeah, right. Okay, so those people who managed to read this, even with missing letters, they know that these words should have these letters. So there are some letters missing, but you still can read this. You still can. Your brain makes assumptions of what letter has to be there based on its previous experience, because your brain sees these words all over. The same thing, Richard Feynman, just genius. Physics is like sex. Sure, it may have some practical results, but that's not why we do it. Absolutely brilliant. And again, some letters are missing, but you know what letters have to be there. Your brain knows this, and brain just fills those gaps. It's really amazing what your brain can do with things. And it's amazing how easy it is for you as a developer, for you as a designer, to influence the perception of your users, of the users of your site, how they perceive your site. It's really, really easy. Another principle is direction. It's kind of like you are here, like you have all seen these stands. You are here in the shopping malls and all these things, and it's really good when you enter in a new shopping mall in a new town, a new city, and you don't know where you are actually. You don't know where to go. And when you see this stand, it gives the relief. It gives you soothing feeling that you know where to go. This is the same with the brain. If design provides some visual guides of how to look at this site, where to move your eyes, this gives really soothing and comfortable feeling to the brain and to your user. This is the painting by Camille Pissarro, Boulevard Montmartre. Here he is using really simple technique. He's just drawing two lines of moving things, moving people, moving horses. So you see the direction. And whenever you see at this picture, you always end up your eye here, because that's where the direction is coming. Whenever you get here, for example, you start looking at this part of the picture, you go down and you are flown by this current. You are there. This is energetic. This gives motion to the picture. Another great painting by Claude Monet this time. Poppies, he's using the same principle, the directions. You see the two figures here, they are like in perspective. And it gives you the moving, it gives you the direction of where to move your eye. And it shouldn't be a surprise for you now that this tree is not there just because he wanted this, or because that tree was really growing there. This tree is here because of the proportions, because it is here to balance this picture, because this part is a little bit heavy. It moves the picture here visually. So he needed to balance this picture, and he put this tree here. And he put it according to 2/3 proportion. And the canvas itself has proportion of 3/4, actually, just in case. This is my site. Don't go there as well. Here I use the direction as well. So whenever you end up here, I don't want you to stay here long. There is nothing interesting happening here. I want you to notice these eyes and follow the site. I want you to get to the text. I want you to read the text, because this is what the site is about. It's about text, it's about content. I want you to, if you end up here for some reason, you see the eyes and you go here. So again, why does it work? Of course, just because of our brain. Everything we see is just the imagination. It's just how our brain pictures it. And as I said, we like to be guided. We like to know where we are and where to go from here. This is essential to giving comfortable feeling to the people. And here is another thing. Who of you see spirals here? Wonderful. And here we have perfect 4 circles. 4 perfect circles. The feeling why you have the squares, the spirals here, is just because of these particular rectangles are rotated, and it makes the feeling of spirals in your brain. It triggers your brain. So when you watch this picture, you see the spirals, and then when you realize that it's just 4 perfect circles, you think to yourself, damn, of course, these are circles, but your brain makes an assumption based on this direction. This shows you the power of direction, how powerful it can be if you are using it in your designs. And one of the most powerful design principles is the contrast. This is really getting into the emotional state. When your brain feels contrast, when the brain experiences contrast, it automatically triggers the brain into the emotional state. The 3 principles we saw before, the proportion, the similarity, and the direction, they give the brain soothing feeling. Brain feels comfortable. Brain feels safe. When brain experiences contrast, it immediately triggers it into the emotional state, because brain cannot understand why it's not comfortable anymore, why it's not soothing anymore. There is something happening here, and brain starts analyzing. That's how you put your very sensitive buttons, very sensitive information that you want people to pay attention to. So contrast, technically, what is contrast? Contrast is just breaking similarity, breaking direction, breaking color, breaking everything, technically, but consciously. Not just breaking everything, because then you will have a chaos. And chaos can be beautiful, I will show you there later, but usually chaos is very not beautiful. So it has to be a conscious decision. You need to know what you're breaking, not just breaking by the sake of breaking. This is the picture I took in Naples in 2007. Like, you see, all the houses are colored more or less the same. But you constantly move your eyes to this color because it's on contrast. It's different. It doesn't look like the rest, like their surrounding. This is amazing photo by Ansel Adams, farm workers and Mountain Williamson. Here, he didn't need to invent direction. Direction is there already. So he used this direction. And it's there. It moves your eyes. It guides you. But then, there is another direction. And you suddenly have contrast in this point. You suddenly have tension in this point. And your eye, whenever you end up here or here, it gets to this part all the time. Because this is where the lines, the imaginary lines, like in this particular case, it's almost physical. But here it is imaginary lines. They guide you. And then they smack together. And that it builds the area of tension. And again, it should not be of a surprise for you that this line, where we have the tension, is 1/3 from the top of the picture. Again, proportion, everywhere you see. It makes things beautiful. More realistic thing for web developers, MailChimp front page. What do you see immediately? Sign up free. This is the button that creates the tension here. Especially, like, I have a feeling, I don't know, I'm not sure, but I have a feeling that they try to experiment. They try to experiment with this front page because you see there are 2 same buttons, sign up free. They're colored differently, they're put in a different place, but it feels like a measurement of what works, what doesn't, to me. Because this button will work for sure. It creates contrast, it uses red color. Red color is the hardest color to process for brain. Red color is the most powerful color you can find. It's more powerful than black, it's more powerful than white, it's more powerful than anything you can find. Because the part of the brain that is responsible for analyzing color is the same part that is responsible for making analytical decisions. So when you see red color, that part of the brain is 90% loaded. There is no space for analytical decision. You are driven by emotions. When you enter a store and they have special offers, they're in red. They are in red because they don't want you to think a lot about this. They want you to go there, grab it, and go away. This is the purpose. This is how red color works. And that's here, it creates contrast, and on this contrast, it triggers your mind, and then they use red color for you to get rid of analytical decisions, be driven by emotions. And again, they use the same principle of direction. You're looking at their mascot, and mascot is looking at the title of this page. And that's where you end up as well. So this is the circle. You look at the mascot, it guides you here, you read here, contrast, you click this button. This is really brilliant. And if you will learn to analyze things like this, to see these things, it will be easy for you to create functional designs that do what you or your project needs to do and deliver the best experience to the users. Contrast. Why does contrast work? In 14th century, Japanese monk Yoshida Kenku wrote this in his essays on idleness. In everything, no matter what it may be, uniformity is undesirable. Leaving something incomplete makes it interesting and gives one the feeling that there is room for growth. Even when building the imperial palace, they always have one place unfinished. He wrote this about incompleteness, but it perfectly matches the idea of contrast. Contrast gives you a feeling of a place to grow. Like, brain cannot understand why it is different. Maybe it had to be done the same way as previous content. Maybe there is a problem here, but you constantly think about this place of contrast. So it's, of course, brain again, again, and again. Everything is driven by your brain. These are the principles, 4 principles that if you are using in your work as a front-end developer when creating responsive design or when analyzing these static designs that are handled to you by your designer, you should be able to analyze those designs and build on top of them to deliver the same experience that is put in the static design, to deliver the same experience for different devices. And you need to make those decisions consciously, understanding what you are doing and why it is important to follow the same guides. There are different principles that are built that can be expressed with these principles. Like, very popular thing now, rhythm. Everybody's talking about vertical rhythm. Like, rhythm is everywhere. Horizontal rhythm, like CSS grids. Grids and rhythm in general is just a combination of proportion and similarity. You take proportion and you repeat it. This is the rhythm. This is how rhythm works. You just take proportion and similarity and repeat it with similarity. Color. As I said, colors, beautiful color palettes are based on proportions. This is just a proportion, nothing more. I would like to show you some works based on pure math, technically. This is photographer Matt Walford. What he does, as he describes himself, he disassembles nature and assembles the way he wants. So he took the leaves and just made a fractal out of them. The mathematical fractal is the set where part of this set is identical to the whole set. So like if you look at the middle part, it will still look the same as the whole thing without the edges, but it will still look the same thing. It's just mathematics. Golden spiral, the same thing. It's just mathematics, but it looks beautiful. This is fascinating. This is nothing more than just a math. This is just a mathematical equation. This is Mandelbrot set. As Benoit Mandelbrot himself describes this diagram, when he's asked, what is the practical use of this? He says, surprisingly very little. there is almost none, but it looks beautiful. This is once again the example of the mathematical fractal. So like this part looks exactly as the whole part. This small part looks like the whole part. And it's, this is built just by using math. You put the mathematical equation into the JavaScript code or any other code, and it builds this for you. That's the Young attractor. These forms are just pure math. They're built with math. There is no designer in the world who would guess, who would think about creating such form just by sitting and drawing. That's impossible. But it's possible with the math. Like, you can get the same shape, but all these interactions, it's impossible. It's really fascinating. And the Young attractor is, where do I have it? I have a good example here. The Young attractor, yeah. So this is built with the Young attractor as well. It's just two equations where you have constants and then two variables. You have fixed constants and then two variables. Right now, I will move your mouse and I will change those two variables, and the form is just changing. The same equation with just two different variables. And you get fantastic forms that you would never come up with if you would just sit and draw. This is math, pure math. Lorentz attractor. Brilliant, the same thing. Like 3 equations, and this is what you can build with these 3 equations. These are the forms built by math. You can change some parameters here. You can like set more interactions, and then click go. You will find these links in the slides that I will put on SlideShare or slide deck somewhere. So this is just the math, nothing more. No design at all here, technically. It's just the math. So why was I talking about this, about science, about design? I want front-end developers to be brave enough to dive into the new worlds that they might not dare to get into now because their designers say they don't need to do design, or they just don't have time. Go and explore, find new challenges, find new problems to solve, and try to figure out why they work this way. This is actually a resounding message from a lot of developers these days. When you, for example, put a JavaScript library, you're using a boilerplate, you're using anything, the first thing you need to understand, why? Why do you need this? How this works, and what implications this action will have to your final product. You always need to think, don't just do blind copy-pasting. Think about what you're doing and be curious about how this works and how this is intended to be working. I couldn't finish with better words than Jeffrey Zeldman. If we want better sites, better work, and better informed clients, the need to educate begins with us. And this is related to everybody who is doing development, who is doing design, everybody. The need to educate begins with us. And this is the main point. Thank you very much. It was a blast to be here. Thank you. One? Yeah. Do you have any questions? Yes, please.
Thanks. A lot of the stuff with the different proportions you had, you could almost reskin a website CSS Garden style. Has somebody done this, and have they looked at conversion rates? Can we qualitatively assess which works for people the best?
Sorry, I'm afraid I didn't understand. Like with CSS Garden part.
Yeah, so you could, all of your grid and your typography, you could just switch between, 3 or 4 different style sheets.
That's an interesting question. I'm not sure anybody did this with like style sheets, but I had an experiment, and I'm still thinking about improving this experiment. You will find this on my website, technically, if you will dive into the code. The code is really messy because I spent much more time than I needed to. But the idea for that blog was I have one constant, and that everything on this side you see is calculated based from that constant, and that constant being the screen width. So when this site is loaded, I calculate the screen width, and I calculate all the variables, all the font sizes, all the, like, it was the ideal thing. I ended up simplifying this thing, but this was a lot of parts of that site are still calculated like this. I get the screen width, and then I calculate everything, because I sincerely believe that you can calculate designs. You can just, as with math, you just have some constants, you put some variables, and it's just completely changed. You can do this with designs. It's just a matter of understanding what exactly you're doing and have some proper predefined constants, like using the proportions, using the different design principles. Does it answer your question? No, good. And then about the style, but about the style sheets, I don't know whether anybody did that, seriously. Anybody else? Thank you very much.